Yeah, this is gonna be interesting. Yeah, so not to get too in the weeds here before the game even starts, but I helped test with Jesse for the RC last weekend, and this was the one matchup we were not excited to play. So we're gonna have to see how she navigates it.
Both players starting off with the namesake creature lands here. We see Hive of the Eye Tyrant and then Hall of the Storm Giants, Den of the Bugbear, and Misery Shadow, new card from Brothers War. A lot of hype around this one. Seems pretty good in this matchup.
It's very good. This card has really done the thing that Red-Black was always trying to do some percentage of the time, which was like disrupt a little bit and then kill you with some creatures real fast. And before, Tenacious Underdog was fine, but it wasn't writing any homes, to your, no letters to your parents. You weren't excited to have that card in your deck. Misery Shadow, on the other hand, solves a bunch of problems and kills very quickly.
Absolutely. Well, here is a good follow-up from Jesse. In-step opt, untapped. We got a little shock. Steam Vents play Ledger Shredder. Both players leading off powerful 2-drops and pass the turn back to Nicholas. We'll see how he answers that. Fatal Push on Ledger Shredder. That's a great way to do it. Now one is going to go to exile, thanks to Misery Shadow. Gonna lay the beatdowns.
It's super important too. Like you would imagine, obviously, with things like Arclight, exiling it's going to be good. But even just the incidental things like Shredder or maybe your main deck thing in the ice, getting those exiled early makes the first treasure cruise so hard to resolve, and the first cruise is so important.
Absolutely. And there is, I believe, a follow-up of Bloodtithe Harvester, kind of one of the other alternate arts there. You do see a blood token enter the battlefield as well. So, good use of mana here from Nicholas as we pass back to Jesse. Plays an island.
Yeah, and I think she has pieces of the puzzle in the hand, but has something else she's kind of considering playing, and looks to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Ledger Shredder, and then the way you want to do it, go ahead and follow up with an opt. That will trigger Connive. We see a Spell Pierce hit the bin. That earns you a counter for your trouble. Jesse taking a look. See how she feels. Looks like that's a no thank you on that card. Gonna take a different one. And Ledger Shredder now a 2/4. Gonna do a good job holding down the fort against what the aggression Nicholas has assembled thus far. But we, the Rakdos Midrange, you said you don't really like this matchup. You have to assume there's a lot of removal spells, especially for things like Ledger Shredder. We see Fatal Push being able to trade profitably for that. Dreadbore, not really the best removal spell, but still at least trades even on mana. And that is what Nicholas has here to clear the way once again for his aggressive force. And the second Ledger Shredder going to hit the exile zone.
Yep, and you're 100% right there, Drake. The deck is chock full of removal, and then post-board, at the RC, you could see open Necklace. There's even more creatures in the sideboard. And just in Fear, there's so many different things that players can play on the sideboard that you're never going to see that kind of leave the deck. And that will get to an exciting part about sideboarding, which I'm sure we'll get to here, hopefully later than sooner. But yeah, it's going to be hard for Jesse to really stick anything the first few kind of times. It's kind of like, when you're young and you fall off the bike and your parents tell you to get back on the bike over and over. That's kind of what this matchup is like. And you hope that like the last thing is good enough.
Absolutely. Well, I was kind of a wuss. I stayed on the training wheels for way too long. Here's pieces of the puzzle. I believe land played beforehand. Going to leave up the Steam Vents, leave out the most options possible. That's going to reveal the top 5. You get instants and sorceries only, and of course, creatures going to hit the exile zone thanks to Misery's Shadow. So Phoenix, normally a great hit off this one, not so good here, but Lightning Axe has to be something I think Jesse's excited about either way. 1 mana removal spell as a follow-up to your card draw spell is going to be a good way to preserve a little bit of that life total that is nearly half gone for Jesse. As you said, all of her creatures being easily dispatched by the Rakdos deck.
Yeah,
and can't imagine we're going to pitch this treasure cruise to it, though.
Yeah, but I think we have an Arclight in hand, so that's just the perfect thing. We've actually fueled our graveyard up enough, and it's not post-board. We don't need to worry about Go Blank or anything like that. Those traumas wait for game 2 and 3, and now we just get to answer this Misery Shadow with Fiery Impulse or Lightning Axe and just sort of set up for the next turns. And with the Axe getting picked up, Drake, Shieldred, one of the cards we're most afraid of off the top, is now a much less of a concern.
Absolutely. And you see actually Fiery Impulse, like you said, that's going to take care of the Misery Shadow. So we do still have that Lightning Axe dialed up for any, Shieldreds that may appear off of either the top of the library or, Nick already having in hand. So Jesse doing a good job recovering here, picked up a treasure cruise to kind of keep the card advantage rolling. Have to imagine that's one of the ones she's very excited to see in this particular matchup. And so now it's once again, players going back and forth, pressure on Nicholas as he untaps to keep the aggression on, have, yet another threat as players just exchange resources.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind is that the Rakdos Midrange deck, while it can go long, typically in game ones of this matchup, it is not really able to play those sort of games. So it's really playing like mono black aggro of old, if you've played some older Pioneer, where you're really trying to get a couple creatures down, cast a key Thoughtseize or two, maybe get a good Fatal Push in, and then close the distance with something like Shieldred.
Well, there is the Shieldred. This card you've been mentioning a lot, a relatively recent pickup. Jesse wasting no time. We're on upkeep. Going to go ahead and take care of that one. Please get that out of here. Do not want to get bonked for the draw step there. And very quickly going to fire off this Treasure Cruise as well. So, Nicholas, like you mentioned, that Lightning Axe playing a huge role here in basically negating Nicholas's entire fourth turn. And now Jesse, getting to refuel with Treasure Cruise, getting the Arclight in the bin. What appear to be some of the better start you could have out of the Rakdos deck looks, maybe like it might not be good enough here from how Jesse's, quickly turning the corner with these card advantage spells and removal spells. Now her life total is still dwindling down. That Bloodtithe Harvester is still in play until this Fiery Impulse comes down and takes care of it. And looks like Treasure Cruise, Fire Impulse. That's 3. Here comes Arclight Phoenix.
Yeah, now Jesse, ironically, really hoping to fade lands from the opponent. Nicholas has a couple creature lands, like you mentioned, had kind of the Tron start, as I like to joke about, the creature land into creature land at the beginning of the game. So now, those are waiting to go. And Jesse, if she can fade one turn of those getting activated, probably can start to stabilize here after resolving such a powerful card like Treasure Cruise.
Looks like she did not fade the land drop. We'll see if Nicholas is interested in firing up a creature land, and he's got options. Hive of the Eye Tyrant, the Den of the Bugbear. Looks like that appears to be a Graveyard Trespasser.
I believe so. I believe that's the double feature showdown movie one, where they removed the ink and they said, buy this one. And I said, hey, will do.
I mean, I can appreciate the aesthetics, but we have Graveyard Trespasser, a card normally pretty good against the card Arclight Phoenix specifically. Less good when the Arclight Phoenix is already in play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something you'll notice too, where obviously Fiery Impulsing is pretty good against the Misery Shadow like we saw earlier, and you get to line up your Lightning Axe with Shieldred. But Jesse is very much aware that, hey, I need to make sure if my Phoenixes are going to the graveyard, that they're coming back immediately. We saw how Nicholas discarded Graveyard Trespasser to the blood, and so that is a pretty big sign to Jesse, like, hey, there's probably more of these. That card's really good against me. There's no way my opponent doesn't know that.
Absolutely. Here's a very good follow-up for Jesse. Another copy of Pieces of the Puzzle. That one's going to find Spikefield Hazard and Chart as I believe the only targets, but there is a Phoenix among the mix. With no Misery Shadow out, that one's going to hit the bin. And Jesse may be a little constricted on mana. We'll see if she has a land to play both of the spells she just picked up. Maybe get this Phoenix back and start to assemble an offense of her own. She has a lot of life total to make up. As here is a Chart, of course. And we do see a Spirebluff Canal, I think, kind of pulled to the front. That one not going to enter untapped. So we'll see exactly how she wants to sequence this turn. See if she's trying to get the Phoenix back now. Or if we're going to maybe save these spells, wait a turn, do it later.
Yeah, and you can see her kind of thinking about, okay, do I want the raw cards from the Chart, of course, attacking, and maybe finding some spot removal spell for the Trespasser, or do I want to kind of risk it? And hey, if I draw, any untapped land, then boom, I get back this Phoenix, and the race is really in my favor. Although she maybe just has to block, even if she, does kind of high roll the land.
Yeah, I think we may need to actually get the Phoenix back just to block, right? We got a Graveyard Trespasser already in play. We have creature lands that are threatened to be fired up. If you can make some trades with Izzet Phoenix, with the Arclight Phoenixes and get Nicholas's board and creature lands kind of removed from the picture, Phoenixes can keep coming back, and you're going to win through a whole host of card advantage as well as board presence from these Phoenixes. We sell that a lot across every format Phoenix has been played in, where if you can trade with them and then bring them back, you end up very wildly ahead. One of the ways this deck can kind of catch up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Arclight Phoenix might have haste, but that doesn't mean you have to attack. You just
absolutely
to attack.
Blocking with Phoenixes. I remember an article written, I think, right when the Phoenix deck was really starting to break out, and the whole joke with it was I won this tournament by blocking with Arclight Phoenixes, not attacking with them, and the whole theme was exactly that. And Jesse really doing a big thonk here. A lot of options, a lot of math to do too on, how many red sources. Cause like the Spikefield Hazard, right, costs specifically red. So you need an untapped red source. So things like Spirebluff Canal are off the table. Additional Spikefield Hazards are red lands, but don't count. So you have to do the math on like, okay, how many of those do I have? If it's a Steam Vents is even worth the 2 life. There's a lot to consider here.
It is a lot, and for what it's worth, outside of Steam Vents, the only untapped red source left in Jesse's deck is 1 Stormcarved Coast. So she has to hit that if she doesn't want to spend the 2 to get the bird. Now, you probably do want to spend the 2 since it can block a 3, but it is sort of like getting dangerously close with the chip shots that we see from the Graveyard Trespasser's trigger.
There is a Steam Vents, so that's a pretty good pickup.
It's also possible Jesse just draws like a Treasure Cruise off the chart.
That'd be gas. That'd be really good. Oh, Fiery Impulse. That's a really good one to have. Wow. Just Fiery Impulse is right when you need them. And Fiery Impulse, making the difference here on that 3 damage versus 2. I had been a staunch advocate for playing, a kind of a mix of the different shock effects you have access to. Fiery Impulse, you see exactly why that one is the removal spell of choice. Being able to take care of Graveyard Trespasser, one of the big cards in this format, as 1 Arclight Phoenix going to go ahead and serve a respect to the creature lands Nicholas has in play for sure.
Yeah, Jesse's saying, hey, if you're going to attack me, it basically has to be Hive of the Eye Tyrant. It's such a shame, too, because if Jesse had ripped another land, like an untapped one off the chart, obviously the Fiery Impulse was good, but if she had like another untapped land, she could attack with both and threaten to do Hall the Storm Giants as a lethal attack.
Yeah. I mean, her creature land definitely representing quite a bit of damage to swing the race as well. And like you mentioned, 1 Arclight Phoenix means Hive of the Eye Tyrant is required to be the one to be fired up because that card has Menace, as it is going to go ahead and connect. I think we saw a Treasure Cruise get exiled by that attack trigger. And Jesse now at 2. Consider going to start the turn off. Have to imagine we're looking for something like a Temporal Trespass.
Yeah, Temporal Trespass, I think, ends the game. I think Jesse picked up Arclight Phoenix for the turn. There was some red. Maybe she just flicked to the Spikefield Hazard, but I'm pretty sure it was an Arclight Phoenix. And if that's the case, if she can find Temporal Trespass, I believe that's lethal because Nicholas is at 15. We attacked for 3 last turn. A little slow down the update. We'll get to you in a second, but that would be 15 again, as we do see Jesse attacking. So
that signals Trespass to me, and there it is, Temporal Trespass, the new addition to the Pioneer. Well, not necessarily terribly new, but a card we maybe didn't expect to see as much as we do. It's been existing in Magic for many, many years and didn't see a ton of play. And now we see just how effective it is getting that extra turn as Hall the Storm Giants gets to be fired up. And an attack with the Phoenixes once again is way more than lethal. And, we see Temporal Trespass doing what it does best. Take that extra turn, get your attack with Phoenixes, and then you see this play pattern a lot. On your extra turn, fire up that Hall the Storm Giants and crunch across. And we see, looks like a shield turn revealed from Nicholas's hand. Says, if I just had one more turn, you're dead to a draw card. And that's what Temporal Trespass does best. Is Jesse wins a game number 1 that it looked like she was behind for so much of that game, and then quickly just flip the script with a couple draw spells, a pieces of the puzzle into a Treasure Cruise, and suddenly you have an embarrassment of riches and are able to close the gap.
Yeah, and that is something that this deck gets to do in game 1, and it's part of the reason why the matchup isn't unsolvable or unsavable, where you win so many game 1s thanks to, like you mentioned, pieces into Treasure Cruise, where you just generate so many more cards, then your Arclight Phoenixes come back, and when you can do that, you can kind of scrape together a win, and sometimes you just easily crush them. Now, post-board, they're going to have a bunch of graveyard hate typically, and that's going to be really hard, and maybe we can check out Nicholas's sideboard and see exactly what hate he's packing for this event.
Absolutely.
Looks like we just have 2 unlicensed hearse, the 2 duress, and the 2 go blank, which is pretty standard. But all those cards, incredibly high impact, and are going to cause a huge trouble at actually using our graveyard as a resource in game 2 and 3, because Jesse can't just willy-nilly fire off a piece of the puzzle. If you do that, you're exposing yourself to a go blank, and you almost have to use your piece of the puzzle more as like a counter spell for go blank, unless it's this proactive thing you get to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The discard spells, of course, being able to pick off a lot of the important spells, things like Temporal Trespass, as we saw win game number 1. Things like Duress can snipe those pretty easily. And with all of the graveyard hate, I mean, Go Blanks, you have Unlicensed Hearse, all that kind of stuff, alongside Misery Shadow. Going to be hard to use Graveyard as a resource, which the Phoenix deck is very well known for. Any interest in things like Extinction Event on evens to take care of like a board? Is that something that you ever do?
You could do it, and maybe if you know Jesse's playing Crackling Drake post board, that's something that you might want to change up. Typically, the way the matchup goes is post board, you trim a lot of things like Bonecrusher Giant, and then some of your Bloodtithe Harvesters, and you kind of play this more controlling role. So Extinction Event is fine, but it's often a little clunky in the earlier turns. But Nicholas does have stuff like Liliana of the Veil, which is not so typical, weirdly enough, to say in current Pioneer in the main deck. So that might change things. And another one in the sideboard, we might see Nicholas try and go for this super long control game and play this really like, I'm going to answer everything. Winning is not anything I worry about. Eventually, Croxa gets there.
For sure. Yeah, kind of taking more of that control role, less of the beatdown like we saw him do in game 1. I like it a lot. Let's see what Jesse's working with.
Yeah, Jesse is going to have a couple cards that are pretty good in this matchup and a couple things that are kind of awkward, but you kind of have to bring in. So she has a Treasure Cruise she's going to sideboard in as a card advantage thing she can find off piece of the puzzle. It feels weird to have one of your sideboard, but typically you just can't afford to have all 6 delve spells from your main deck. We're going to see her probably bring in Abrade as well. Her 2 Brotherhood's End, which has been an all-star card from Brothers War. It's kind of like an Anger of the Gods meets a Mass Shatter. So it's able to answer things like the Unlicensed Hearse while still answering all the creatures. And then, you're probably going to see the 2 Crackling Drakes as kind of just a hope they hit and connect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Crackling Drake, at the very least, gets a card for your trouble. Big Crackling Drake advocate myself. The Treasure Cruise, like you mentioned, a big pickup. Yeah, I think there's a pretty good plan. So with the Treasure Cruise, are you looking to shave a little bit on your graveyard reliance, knowing that the Rakdos deck typically brings in a ton of graveyard cards? Are you trimming on things like pieces of the puzzle and Galvanic Iteration to like mitigate some graveyard stuff? Or are you just going to try to fair mode those cards and say, they're worse, but they're still good enough?
Yeah, so where we kind of landed on things, and there's a lot of like differing opinions on this. Most people just cut Trespass to start with, just because despite what we saw in the last game, it's weirdly awkward when they have a lot more interaction for your hand and the graveyard. So, and if you're going to bring in a Treasure Cruise, that's a way to kind of like mitigate the amount of graveyard hate while also like still having ways to use it. As for things like Galvanic, those typically get left in some number as a way to kind of help answer a shield or something like a Fiery Impulse. But also, if your opponent just builds up a couple creatures, Galvanic Impulse can be a really good way to get ahead. Or you can just kind of, fork something for value. So you kind of rely on those things. But then really there's a couple school of thoughts where you can kind of get rid of your Spell Piercers. You can actually cut your Ledger Shredders in the hopes of making their removal worse. There's a lot of different ways to go. And I'm actually unsure on where Jesse lands. It's really... there's not any huge consensus on what's the best thing to actually do.
Absolutely. Well, both players here looking at opening hands. Jesse, of course, going to be on the draw for this game as she won game number 1. So Nicholas, aggressive start in game 1, didn't quite get it done. So play draw, could matter somewhat as far as being on the draw, the card advantage mattering if Nicholas decides to pivot into less of, a beatdown plan, respecting the fact that Jesse has all of these card advantages we saw pick up game number 1, and rely on his hateful cards, mulligan to those, have access to some pressure, and kind of take this more true control, like mid-range plan where you do a lot more interacting and a lot less just trying to beat down before the card advantage comes down.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier how I tested with Jesse for the RC. I actually got very lucky to beat Rakdos 4 at the RC, and I qualified for the Pro Tour. But Drake, the thing that I was doing that I kind of pitched and no one else was talking about is I took the draw. I took the draw.
Take the draw. See, that's what I was just getting at there.
Yeah, I know. I can hear you doing it.
Okay.
I don't know. So this event is an open deck list, right? So if it was open deck list and I just saw what I saw with Nicholas's deck, I don't know if I would against Liliana of the Veil. But in the dark, I actually think there's a good argument to just taking the draw and making sure that you line up your removal with when they're trying to present threats, and not doing things like, if you're going to leave in your Ledger Shredders, going first will make it so that you play into their fatal pushes and stuff, and then they develop a threat and you start to fall behind. I'm actually a pretty big believer in taking the draw. I am unsure if it is 100% right, but I know that I do it, and that's all I can say. We
might get a look in game number 3 if we do get one of those. as Nick going to very quickly lead off on a duress of Hive of the Eye Tyrant. Gets a look at, hey, check it out. Here's a 5, 3 lands, kind of 4 lands with Spikefield Hazard and a Consider. Hard not to take the Consider here, despite it being not a terribly high quality hit.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of just hoping, and we talked about taking this ultimate control role. This is one of the games where you've hoped you left in some of the creatures of your Nicholas. That way you can actually just start pressuring and punish Jesse for having this sort of mulligan into nothing.
Absolutely. As looks like we're flipping a land. I have to imagine this one's going to be a pathway of some kind. Jesse only played a turn 1 tapped Steam Vents and passed back. And here is a Bloodtithe Harvester. I mean, that's the follow-up you're just kind of mentioning. Like, doesn't even need to be a lot of pressure, but just, a 3-power creature on turn 2, going to be good enough to get it done. And Jesse with a great draw step in a Ledger Shredder of her own.
Yeah, that's a really big draw step. And you see Jesse think there too. Kind of think about, am I supposed to play around discard spell? Am I supposed to run this out? And she's on such low resources that these are the kind of things that are going to make or break games. And it looks like Nicholas was actually just moving to attacks first. Okay.
All right. Yeah, a little beatdowns. You want to block? Absolutely not. As here is a Urborg, and Liliana the Veilwood look excellent here. And it is a Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Going to go ahead and make the Goblin Shaman token.
Yeah, Fable the Mirror Breaker, hard to say anything else about this card because it's just been such an all-star for so long now in Magic, despite it only being about 9 months that we've had this card. But this card really helps Rakdos Midrange play different styles of games and make it so that the deck can actually go kind of long against things like this piece of the puzzle that we're seeing Jesse fire off here, where normally they just can't actually fight through these sort of cards because they have no card selection.
Absolutely. It's definitely a powerful one. Turns out you staple enough words on any card, it's going to look really good. As you mentioned, here is Pieces of the Puzzle. I believe that one found another Pieces and a Treasure Cruise. So not going to grow the Ledger Shredder. Jesse may be in danger of bleeding a little bit of life total, but we've seen this happen before. We saw this happen game 1 where Jesse's like, oh, wow, like I'm behind. You have a beatdown. And then, she just casts a bunch of card advantage spells and makes up for it. So I think, Nicholas may have some pressure on him to find some of these hateful cards in order to keep himself, from falling behind again to the exact same thing that happened game 1.
100%. And this is a huge moment. So we're getting a little bit of a rummage going off here with the Fable and Mirror Breaker. It looks like we're only discarding 1. Go Blank is the card you need right now if you're a Nicholas fan. That is the way to stabilize against what Jesse's doing. If Nicholas doesn't have that card here, we could see Jesse start to pull back from this mold of 5 that has been honestly really good for a mold of 5.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that turn 2 Ledger Shredder huge into a turn 3 Pieces. None of those cards were in that opening hand. So just great draw steps all around and completely unfixed. As here comes a beatdowns for 5 from the Goblin Shaman token. Going to make a Treasure. And of course, Bloodtithe Harvester. Looks like no blocks have happened. Reaching for 3 mana here. What do we have here? Looks like Graveyard Trespasser going to add to the beatdown strategy. So this, very much kind of a replay of game 1 where we have, all the beatdowns, but Jesse, for as good as her game 1 was, it was still a close game. But she did not, just win by miles. You get a good look at Graveyard Trespasser. Going to cost you a card to target this one. And of course, when it enters the battlefield, going to go ahead and exile a card, which is going to do a fair bit of work to mitigate the Treasure Cruise that we know about in Jesse's hand.
Yep. Yeah, and Jesse's deck looks like she decided to go for the keeping in Shredders and bringing in the Drakes and everything. And so getting to, hit one of Jesse's cards in the graveyard and still get that drain is so important. We saw in the last game how Nicholas, couldn't even afford to take a card from Jesse's graveyard and needed to push the damage so much. So anytime you get that to overlap is really strong.
And a Misery Shadow follow-up from Nick is actually going to trigger Ledger Shredder. We saw Spikefield Hazard from the opening hand hit the bin and grow the Ledger Shredder. So now if you're Jesse, this is just your kingdom for a Brotherhood's end, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what's happening here.
Oh, no.
Oh, it looks like we're
it's just pieces
okay.
of the puzzle. Okay. All right.
The way she started to tap that so aggressively, I was just like, oh, she has it rolled up.
Well, there is one off of this pieces of the puzzle, an embarrassment of resources actually off of this. Brotherhood's End and a Fiery Impulse picked up off the second copy of Pieces of the Puzzle. Pieces of the Puzzle kind of works like Expressive Iteration, very good at finding additional copies. And Brotherhood's End, we get a good look here, a small upgrade to Sweltering Suns.
Yeah, it looks like Jesse had the Stormcarved Coast. Guess she was a little light on Treasure Cruising and potentially Brothers Ending off the top there. So hard to tell with it.
Yeah, I think the graveyard had got cut down to only 4 cards or whatever. We definitely didn't have this stock graveyard that we have now at the start of this turn. Or I think Jesse probably would have reached for that. As here is a Fiery Impulse follow up, going to take care of the Misery Shadow. Now, should that Arclight Phoenix that was hit be in exile because of that Misery Shadow?
So Misery Shadow is weird. It says when a creature dies. So getting discarded, or getting milled doesn't actually affect it. It's a really weird templating. Yeah.
I like the design. Don't just have a rest in peace stapled to a creature. Come on, we don't have to do this.
Yeah, that's
here is a third factor. Fable the Mirrorbreaker, going to exile it and bring back the Reflection of Kiki Jiki. Far from a Kiki Jiki, but doesn't need to be, as Fable does so many other things. We now have 4 creatures in play. Jesse at a somewhat precarious 13, given the offense that Nick has assembled. But that Brotherhood's End, representing to wrath Nicholas and leave Jesse's creature behind. So Nick, I'm sure, very interested in firing off a discard spell to take care of that Brotherhood's End. Otherwise, he may be in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how Nicholas wants to attack as well, because you can get some tricky attacks in where you can push Graveyard Trespasser and the Goblin Shaman and leave back your Bloodtithe Harvester in order to kill the Shredder if it wants to block that. So, but then you push a little less damage across the board, but maybe you open up some cards in your hand. A really interesting turn. And Nicholas, the Brotherhood End is face up, right? Both players know this is coming. So Nicholas is not going to deploy any more creatures this turn. So it's really going to come down to, what do I want to do in order to try and get the most advantage against Jesse? Because I know I'm getting 4 for 1 on the next turn.
Here's an interesting attack. Here comes Graveyard Trespasser and the Goblin Shaman token as the only attackers. Maybe representing the Bloodtithe Harvester, going to take care of the Ledger Shredder after blocks. Now, the Graveyard Trespasser does threaten to flip into the Graveyard Glutton, which is a 4/4. So it would survive the Brotherhood's End, if that's an angle you wish to take. But looks like Nicholas kind of seeing the writing on the wall, willing to just kind of trade his resources for Jesse's. Although could do this if the Brotherhood's End happened anyway. We do get a treasure for our trouble. We'll see what his follow-up is.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's some really... Oh, okay. We're playing another Trespasser. Okay. Maybe Nicholas is wanting to just control the Arclight Phoenixes in the graveyard and is willing to kind of take some cards to make sure that, hey, this game, like we mentioned, I talked about when to take the draw. It's going to go really long. Maybe I just want to throw away some cards to make sure these Arclights don't come back 2 to 3 times.
Absolutely. Unlicensed Hearse, the follow-up, so a ton of graveyard hate action going on. Now, Unlicensed Hearse, Graveyard Trespasser, the thing about these cards is that they aren't great at nuking a large graveyard. And we're going to see that matter a lot right here, because we know Jesse has a Treasure Cruise, and we know that, there's a Brotherhood's End, and Jesse would love to do both of those things. And she's going to be able to, despite 2 pieces of graveyard hate on the battlefield, because, they're just one shot, 2 shot, hit specific cards, not able to nuke the entire stocked graveyard that Pieces of the Puzzle has created. Jesse able to Treasure Cruise for 1 mana, despite, 5 mana spent on different graveyard hate pieces on Nicholas's previous turn. And that's going to matter a lot, as Brotherhood's End deal 3 damage mode is the follow-up.
100%. And we saw Jesse here. It's refueled, ready to go. And now the big problem for Jesse to solve is the Unlicensed Hearse. It's over the next couple of turns going to grow in size pretty well. And Nicholas is top decking, but has some of those creature lands like we talked about before that can kind of, start taking over the game. And rip Fable the Mirrorbreaker. Yeah,
Fable the Mirrorbreaker, a huge pickup here. Able to, kind of help rebuild Nicholas's offense. He does, like you mentioned, have those creature lands that can crew this Hearse. And the Hearse, if it gets to stick around, is going to become sizable enough that Jesse's somewhat precarious life total of 10 is going to start to look smaller than it should as Hearse grows and grows. Consider on Instep for Jesse, looking for answers.
Yeah, and it looks like Nicholas showing a lot of respect towards Treasure Cruise, looking to activate the Hearse immediately. Sometimes we'll see players hold it, maybe try to catch something like Arclight Phoenix. But I think Nicholas knows, hey, I already killed 2 Arclight Phoenixes, whatever. I just can't beat another Treasure Cruise real quick, even if Jesse spends her whole turn doing it.
Absolutely. And Jesse with a great follow-up. Crackling Drake. That one doesn't care where your instants and sorceries are. As long as they are not in your deck or hand, they can be in graveyard or exile. Also going to get a card for your trouble. So Jesse, a very, very good follow-up. Does represent the ability to trade with the Hearse. Get a good look at that one. Only 4 toughness, but 4, kind of a magic number in this format where Fiery Impulse is the damage spell of choice. Doesn't get caught by that one. And gets a card for your trouble, and we're going to get a power check right now. I can't imagine it's south of 10. So yeah, 12 is the answer here.
I would say big enough. You know, it's going to get the job
big
done.
enough indeed. And here is a beatdowns with Goblin Shaman token. See Nicholas kind of make these attacks a lot where maybe we're happy to kind of just trade our Goblin Shaman token for just some mana. You kind of use it as a Lotus Petal.
Yeah. And it looked like Nicholas, the reason he didn't loot,
used there.
He ripped Fatal Push Drake. That's why he didn't loot. So he made the treasure, sacked it, said, whatever, I don't care how big your Drake is, it's dead, you know?
Yeah, so I guess there's a bit of delay on my end. Yeah, that's way better. Go ahead and take care of the Crackling Drake, lay the smack down with the Goblin Shaman token, and start working on Jesse's life total once again. And Jesse has resolved a lot of card advantage this game, but the kind of incidental resources Nicholas has picked up, kind of still amounting to a lot. Nick definitely behind on cards, but it's not like Jesse's ahead by miles. And Nick is still ahead on board, which is the kind of the big one for his current strategy. He had kind of another creature draw like we saw in game one. And, we'll see if Jesse can pull it out the same way she did in game one. And here comes an Arclight Phoenix.
Yeah, we see Jesse wanting to start to rumble. And I think that's typically pretty good. She's going to kind of fall behind. There's a Hive of the Eye Tyrant in play. She's not going to really win. If Nicholas's best draw is a land, holding back is not an exciting place to be. And so tries to maybe hope to draw something a little clunkier.
As here is that Hive of the Eye Tyrant going to go ahead and come across 4/5. Maybe this is representing something like you need Temporal Trespass to win the game anyway, so you might as well start working on the damage instead of trying to mitigate the bleeding as far as life total goes. As Nicholas is kind of rebuilt, and Fable the Mirror Breaker, basically just the only card involved in the rebuild, as we see a Goblin Shaman, Reflection of Kiki Chiki, and the Hive of the Eye Tyrant among the lands. It's going to draw out another Brotherhood's End just to take care of those the single Fable the Mirror Breaker.
Yeah, and I think Jesse, it looks to me like she has Otawara as her answer to the Hive of the Eye Tyrant.
A tough way to do it.
Yeah, but it is a way.
It is a way to do it. Yeah, I mean, that's going to give her a turn.
Yeah, and, maybe she has something like Impulse there, but she definitely has the Otawara. Yeah, there she goes. An interesting spot to be for sure.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not the way you drew it up. Jesse having no offense. It's very much stifling the bleeding as Hive of the Eye Tyrant. Gonna get played tapped again. All right, we can do this again. A little time walk.
Yeah, and I think Jesse's hand is land Arclight Phoenix before the draw. So we're gonna need some spot removal spell where we're gonna need to change some spells off in order to get a couple blockers in play. Yeah, it also should be night, but yeah. Looks like we're going to game 2. That's
not going to be good enough. And so we are going to see a game number 3 here. And game number 1, kind of went the exact same way as game number 2. And there's 2 different victors for each of those games. So that's an interesting kind of, I guess, analysis of how this matchup plays out. I think the conclusion there is that it's close. Mm-hmm. These post-board matchups, these pre-board matchups, both players have different roles they can take as far as being the beatdown versus being the control role. And, both of these games kind of felt like they were kind of on the razor's edge. If Jesse has the ability to do the trespass thing with a couple Phoenixes, it's going to be good enough. But if not, we see Nick get there despite 2 sweepers coming down on his offense.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like Nicholas, just kind of goes unimpeded. Jesse interacted with everything along the curve and definitely tried to stop Nicholas. But unfortunately for her, not able to actually get it soon enough and had just too much chip shot damage come through. And like we mentioned, having a bunch of cards is good, but you do need time and life in order to kind of deploy those things, because the Rakdos deck is trying to make sure that, like, hey, I understand I pressure life total better than you, especially when taking the role Nicholas is. So I'm going to focus on those sort of things and not focus on card advantage as much, and just hope to keep you off too many early treasure cruises.
Absolutely. And, that was an interesting thing we saw too, is despite multiple graveyard hate pieces, Jesse's still kind of able to do whatever she wanted with her graveyard. So, it really shows the power and the resiliency of the Arclight Phoenix deck. It doesn't just fold to some graveyard hate. Like, okay, yeah, cool, graveyard hate, good against my deck. But I think we saw 3 total pieces. We saw Misery Shadow too. And Jesse's still very much able to do basically whatever she wanted with her graveyard. Treasure Cruises and Arclight Phoenix is coming back and the whole 9. But, despite all of those things, still kind of functioning, maybe a little bit impeded, was not able to convert to a victory on the Multa 5. So we'll see, what changes here. We'll see if she takes the draw. It's an exciting moment for you, Mason. See if the testing, she going to try it. here in game number 3.
So, a little fun fact about the story. Jessie, a very good, dedicated testing partner, went and played locally with some of her friends. I went to go see Wakanda Forever, doing my part for the team. That way I could tell
Good
her,
testing.
like if I see the movie, then we have to double up our time. Really, it's really
Right.
effective, And so I mentioned to her, hey, try taking the draw in the testing games. She did not like it. It did not go well. So I don't know if Jessie's going to believe. I haven't tried to really sell her again since then. So I am excited, like you mentioned. What is she going to do? How is she going to end up playing? Will she take the draw? It is not a normal Magic Theory thing to do, right? Like, how many times have you heard someone talk about taking the draw in Magic and actually have it make even a little bit of sense?
Usually in limited, or you're playing Manaless Dredge. That's what I got.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that statement, but I think this is the one time I feel a little bit confident. I'm willing to stick my neck out on it. You know what I mean? I had a
Stick your neck out. You learned Wakanda Forever taught you the way. The way is taking the draw, and she does not, as she leads off with Hall of the Eye Tyrants. Looks like she's able to keep more cards in her opening hand. A big part of the equation for sure. As here comes black side of this pathway. Get the name on that guy real quick. That is Blightstep Pathways. Here's a Thought Seize. We'll get a good look at the grip once again. Removal spells. After watching how this game played out, removal spells.
Also, it's easy to forget because of how much card advantage Jessie had there. She mulled to 5 that last game.
Right.
And so, I mean, even if this 7 isn't your favorite 7 you've ever seen, it does just have 2 more kill spells. And if Jessie had 1 more kill spell in that early game, she takes 6 to 9 less damage off that first Bloodtithe Harvester. And maybe that gives her enough time to stabilize.
Yeah. I mean, true. Also, based on how Nicholas has approached both of these games, it seems like he's not interested in really shaving any of his creatures at all, and he's very interested in just laying the smackdown. So I kind of maybe this is the hand you would mulligan against somebody that's just like removal spell, Hearse, Liliana the Veil, or whatever. But, given how Nicholas has played these games, I do like how she's just like, okay, I'll just keep a bunch of removal spells. You want to play that game, as there's a Shock of Steam Vent and a pass of the turn.
Yeah, I wonder if Jessie even knows about the Liliana the Veil. Like I mentioned, it's not open deck list. I don't think has seen it on anything, and that does change the way the games play out pretty drastically. It looks like she picked up Treasure Cruise, but Nicholas picked up Duress Return.
And still, the Duress does not hit it. So that speaks to maybe Nicholas trying to clear the way for a Hearse and just saying, all right, this Treasure Cruise is never going to work. Get out of here. You can keep your Lightning Action, keep your Treasure Cruise. You're paying 8 mana for that Treasure Cruise if you want it.
Yeah, that to me is a very big, there's another discard spell or there's a...
Oh, sure. How about another Thoughtseize? Very different from how these games have played.
Yeah, and you see, too, this is sort of the trouble with the Izzet versus Rakdos matchup is you keep a hand like this, and Jessie has this hand game 2, game 1, easy peasy. Definitely not a steamroll or anything, but game is super stabilized. She's really happy. Sometimes they just draw a bunch of discard into a Hearse, and they have to keep those hands, and it's just so hard for you to ever come back from those.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Nicholas's hand, as we do see the Hearse follow up and activate immediate. Like you said, get aggressive. Never. You're not activating this Treasure Cruise. Get out of here. And Crackling Drake off the top. Going to be a good one against the unlicensed Hearse. Also, could not get hit by the Thoughtseizes. Can't beat the top of the deck. As a very quick pass of the turn back. Tap Blood Crypt for Nicholas.
That's a huge one. Jessie must know you're in the booth here today, Drake, so she's making sure to pull out all the stops when we get these going. This is huge. I think this thing's about 6 power. I could be mistaken. Maybe it's only 4 power, but it's a lot.
I'm willing to go on record saying it doesn't matter too much because it can grow very fast.
Yeah, if Jessie rips a piece of the puzzle off the top here, we might just go on a 2-turn clock for Nicholas.
Talk to me. As we see Fable the Mirror Breaker, a good follow-up for Nicholas. Going to make a Goblin Shaman. Now, we're probably going to wait on this in License for activation, as there is only 1 card in Graveyard for Jessie. He says, no, absolutely not. I still don't care. Get that out of here. And I will make it a 3. As Crackling Drake is a 3/4 at the moment. We'll see what kind of maneuvers Jessie wants to make it bigger. Maybe do nothing. I don't know. Not a lot of offense from Nicholas, as we mentioned. Previously, at this point in the game, Jessie was about 8 life points lower, and that is just not the case here, as here is Lightning Axe discarding Treasure Cruise. That's going to grow Crackling Drake by 2, and here's a Smackdown for 5.
Yep. And we see a lot of respect for not only pushing damage, but knowing her role, right? Jessie's like, yeah, I have 5 lands. Maybe I sneak through this Treasure Cruise in 6 turns. But if I do this now and play this land, I push much more damage over time and actually potentially set up a lethal if I draw something like pieces into maybe another pieces with having another land in hand.
It's a tough space to be on a second chapter of Fable going off because, when you see Nick, discard extra Fable and a Blightstep Pathway. 2 more cards coming. That's 2 more looks at a removal spell. And if Jesse's somewhat all in on this Crackling Drake and the top of her deck, that's not really where you want to be with your opponent having filtering to find cards they play a lot of, namely removal spells.
Yeah, it's weird because it's almost worse if Nicholas doesn't loot, right? If he's just like, I'll skip it.
Yeah, true. Try thing, right?
He's like, I don't really care.
Just have it rolled up.
Yeah.
And looks like a Graveyard Trespasser. That's not a removal spell. The dream is alive as far as this Crackling Drake getting to connect again.
You know what, too? If it's funny, we keep mentioning how like lands are really good for kind of Jessie and how she wants to rip pieces. She's really close to activating Hall of Storm Giants. And then I believe Nicholas is like, I think he's a little lower than the life total says because he shocked twice. He got Thoughtseize twice and then hit for 5. So he should be at 11, which means this Drake will put him to 6, which means Hall is lethal. And it seems kind of silly, but just activate Hall every turn, attack with both these things. How is Nicholas supposed to kill the Drake and the Hall if he can't kill the Drake right now?
Yeah, I mean, you just Abyss. Welcome to it. Here's my mono blue Abyss for 6 mana. As here comes Crackling Drake, another beatdown for 5. No spells for Jesse, and probably going to be played this turn. Creatures or lands, probably it. Otherwise, you'd cast those pre-combat. So here's a smack for 5. See if there's any follow-up. Like you mentioned, just making land drops great for Jesse here. Able to threaten to activate this Hall of the Storm Giants, and then the Hearse doesn't even outsize it yet. So, not a lot of things that Nicholas can assemble with what is on board in order to check the Hall of the Storm Giants, but no land drop appeared to be made there. And we are going to flip tonight, which is pretty big for Nicholas, being able to convert this Trespasser into now a 4/4.
Yeah, I believe so. And we are getting the score updated at home. Nicholas is at 6. There we go. And so this is pretty big here. And it makes me wonder too, what does Jesse have in hand where it wasn't a land or a spell she could cast or a creature she wanted to hit with?
Maybe something like Otawara again. Like that's something you'd probably want to activate. But with the Graveyard Glutton currently in play, I mean that represents to change the math, right? Because we can exile cards from graveyards and then do some draining. And like that those 2 life points, if you're able to hit what's the requirement for Glutton?
Creatures.
Creature card. If you're able to hit the creatures, which doesn't look like there are any, so we're kind of good as far as that goes. You need a removal spell for Nicholas. But if you're able to do that, you can suddenly look to survive a hit from the Hall of the Storm Giants. So here's a crack for 9, puts Jesse to 9, and a Misery Shadow, the follow-up.
Yeah.
A little late to the party. But the graveyard fully checked. We mentioned how a lot of times the one-shots aren't good enough. All of 3 of these worth quite a bit. As here's a Consider. Graveyard, a Brotherhood's End. That one's not good enough against the Graveyard Glutton, given that it is a 4/4. Pieces of the Puzzle, another big one, and we may have just assembled lethal here.
I was gonna say, I think the Consider was lethal on its own. I think Jesse is just kind of going through the motions, making sure to I have lethal. Let's just cast my card to make sure everything works. And I can't imagine a card where Nicholas would give Jesse
removal spells. Nick, imagine you have some, you probably want to use those first.
Yeah, and Jesse has stuff like
he
Negate
does
her
not.
board.
Jesse gonna win game number 3.
Nice. Yeah, that well played.
Wow.
And this is a thing too where it's kind of talking about before Drake, where the matchup is not good or whatever, but you win so many of the game ones. It's like Affinity and Old Modern, to be a bit of a boomer here, where you win game ones, your opponents all have a bunch of hate for you, but even if they have that hate, they've got to draw it in the right mixture. And we saw that game where Nicholas had a hand completely different than the first 2 games, right? And like you astutely mentioned, the first 2 games were very close, and Nicholas was able to put the pressure on Jesse. One time he crossed the finish line, one time he didn't. However, for game number 3, we just saw Nicholas basically keep a hand of 3 discard spells, a Graveyard Hate card, and 3 lands. Typically pretty good, but you do have to kind of stop the Arclight Phoenix deck from pressuring you, and having Crackling Drake off the top there for Jesse was the perfect card to kind of put Nicholas in check and sort of a hand that normally is really good and only gets punished by a card like that or pieces of the puzzle.
I mean, you hit the hammer, you hit the nail on the head with the hammer. Here you go, whatever. The matchup here is very clearly on the Rakdos side about drawing the right half of your deck. You need to draw the graveyard hate pieces when they're trying to do the graveyard thing. You need to draw the removal spells when they're doing the creature thing. And so there we saw, the graveyard kind of online, and Crackling Drake was the perfect juke, right? Here's my creature, draws a card, it flies, so I don't care about any of your ground pounders, and it's just going to continue to grow despite all of your graveyard hate. And we saw, with no removal spells coming, because that's not the half of the deck that Nicholas drew, we saw that Crackling Drake being able to go, unanswered and connect for literally, Nick's entire life total. And so having that juke and Phoenix having the cantrips to find their right half of the deck a little bit easier. I mean, we do see Rakdos having Fable, the Mirror Breaker, to try to solve some of those problems, but it wasn't quite good enough in that game because Nick drew one as well. Jesse able to kind of juke around the draw that Nick had assembled and, find herself a check mark on that game.
Yeah, really, one thing to kind of think about with these decks is maybe you're at home and you like both these decks and you're unsure which one you want to play. The Rakdos deck is kind of the more pure version of this sort of interaction style deck, but Izzet Phoenix is kind of the mirror, and it mirrors it by having a very similar ability to break things up and play those sort of game plans. But in exchange for having some more like generically powerful cards like 3/2s that just kind of, interact on the board and have a low fail rate, you have cards like Opt and Consider, which allow you to sculpt your draw so that you find the interaction you want. So it's actually very like two sides of the same coin. One's just including to have more card selection, while the other one choose to have like more raw power on the board. And so you kind of see how that plays out in this matchup, and how imagine that same game, Drake, except instead of having the third discard spell, we just had Bloodtithe Harvester. If we just had a 3/2 beating down there, Jesse might have lost that game.
Absolutely. I mean, you lose that race pretty easily, right? Like one of the first duress was kind of a low impact, only hit a Consider. Like if you mentioned, one of those discard spells is instead worth pressure because the discard spells do have diminishing returns as Jesse's hand quality, decreases. Then the life total is very different. And we saw literally feast or famine. Like the perfect mix never really was assembled for Nicholas through all three of those games. Like the first two games, it was just all beat down, none of the discard really for the disruption. Some of the other pieces like removal, but like none of that perfect, like, okay, I want to discard you, I want to play a creature and play to start laying the beat down. And then, okay, let's get some stuff out of the way of my creature with removal spells and stuff. That perfect mixture of cards that makes the Rakdos deck look, extremely streamlined and powerful was never really put together. And, Jesse in games 1 and 2 especially was able to find her first piece of card advantage to chain into the second one. And then suddenly she had the embarrassment of riches. That was exactly what she wanted. And that is the advantage to playing these kinds of card draws, these card filterings, all this stuff. I mean, a fundamental of Magic, right? Like if you have the time and the mana to cast these things, then you're going to be able to have the better mixture. And we saw that triumph there in that match.
100%. And I want to we have Jessie set up for an interview, so let's go talk to her and see what she kind of thinks about this matchup and everything, and let's see kind of what her thoughts on it. I think she's ready for us to go on down there right now. But yeah, I'm curious to see, because I agree with a lot of what you say, and I'm kind of curious to see how she's feeling, especially, this is the bad matchup. If you're going into the tournament, and it looks like we have Jessie here putting on her headset for us, excited to game. But Jessie, how are you feeling?
You like that match, Mason?
I like that match. It was exciting. How do you feel? I was just telling Drake about how, this is the nightmare matchup. It's round 1. This is never how you want to start your tournament. How are you feeling right now after this tough round 1?
Well, I took a mentality when I saw the Blood Crypt come down that I can't slip up this round, which is a Mason Clark original thought. Yeah, we've played this matchup a billion times, you and I, and it's certainly not good, but I felt going into this tournament like I was actually confident in the matchup for the first time ever, based on just the stuff I've learned talking to you, talking to Ross Merriam, talking to Nathan Stoyer, and just sort of synthesizing what everyone was saying. And I felt good about my plan. And I'm officially a Crackling Drake believer.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that. I think you and
Drake,
I have had an interaction in the past where I mentioned I'm a staunch advocate, not just because we share a name, but a big Crackling Drake believer, and you were kind of lower on the card. And obviously, we saw it perform very well there in game number 3, but maybe the story's different if a removal spell comes down and suddenly your entire plan falls apart. It's like, what is this doing here? Run me through your thoughts on playing, and I know you're on 2 copies. You mentioned you were lower on the card. Has your perspective changed? Is that a big key part of your plan tackling this Rakdos matchup that is your nightmare matchup going into this weekend?
Yeah, basically where I'm at is the matchup's bad. You have to hope to get lucky to some extent in order to win, whether that's getting lucky off what you draw off the top of your deck, getting lucky that they don't have a specific card in a specific spot. If both players draw equally well, generally I find the Phoenix player loses, post-board game specifically. And Crackling Drake is kind of just your best way to cheese them. You know, if you're exchanging this like war of attrition, exchanging resources throughout, you know, the early turns, the best turn to draw Crackling Drake is like turn 7 or 8.
Right.
That game was a bit of an anomaly where I drew it on turn 4, which is kind of one of the, you know, not a great time to draw it because it's not big, so it's not killing them in one hit, which is one of the main appeals for Crackling Drake. And then also, your opponent has all the most resources they could possibly have at that point for a Drake. So I was basically just crossing my fingers that it was going to live. And I was also trying to navigate around Fatal Push. It was unclear. I didn't know if my opponent would, if they had a Fatal Push, recognize that Fable flipping gave them a revolt or not. But I was basically like, I don't want to play into this Fatal Push if they have one. And fortunately, I drew the Consider, which meant I didn't have to cast the Brotherhood's End for lethal. And ultimately, they didn't have a Fatal Push anyway. But yeah, that was sort of basically the appeal of Drake is, yes, it draws a card. So even if it gets removed, it's not the end of the world. But then more specifically, if you untap with it in the late game, you win, which is not true of any of the other options for that slot.
100%.
Happy to hear you're a believer.
Yeah, you convinced me, Drake.
Yeah, I'm sure it was me single-handedly.
Yeah. I didn't realize that it was named you, so.
It is. We share it. It's wholesome.
You should have made that point, Drake. It seems so obvious to you, but to others, sometimes you just gotta show them the light, you know?
I gotta let them know, you know, when they address me, I am the Crackling Drake. You know,
exactly.
I'm doing all the winning, of course. No.
Jesse,
so this is a big tournament for you.
Right? Sorry.
Yeah. should just play the Drake stack. I should just go all 4 Crackling Drakes every event I can play it in.
Yeah.
This is a big event for you. You started off with a win. Big pickup for you because I know you're already qualified for the Energy Champs. You're in this Player of the Year race, trying to earn a free entry in all the energies next year.
Yes.
Talk to me about your mentality. You're here to game. You're going to be in Louisville next weekend. High pressure. You feeling it?
Yeah. So it's coming down to the wire here. We've got a handful, 3-4 players who seem like they're in contention. My fellow feature matchee, Connor, is one of them. And then, of course, Zach Allen, my one-time teammate, now bitter rival. Just kidding. I am very excited. Something I'm really interested in is getting that ability in the champs to swap a player out of my pod. So that's definitely something that I'm eyeing. I'm hoping to go to Louisville. I'm not totally sure if I will yet, but I'm leaning towards yes at the moment. I feel like if I get a strong finish today, and tomorrow, I'm a lock to at least X2, modern. But yeah, I feel pretty good about my chances. It's going to be a tight race, but I feel confident in my own ability to beat Connor and Zach.
Well, I love to hear our little smack talk. I love to hear the confidence as well. We wouldn't expect anything less from you, Jesse. Jesse, thank you so much for making some time for here in the booth. Now go enjoy your round. We'll see you, I'm sure, later on in the day as well for the future match area. Good luck in the rest of your rounds. And then let's head back to here real quick because we got some exciting stuff to talk about. As Drake, here's the exciting thing. We have more Magic coming up in just a minute. But first, we're going to take a quick little break and get our next feature match set up. And then we'll be back in about 2 minutes. So go use the bathroom, get ready, come on back. We have some more Magic coming for you very soon.